Welcome to this CAPTIVATE session presented by the Contemporary Archive Project, supported by the National Arts Council. I'm Russel Hlongwane, the session's host, in discussion with photographer and cultural producer Mandisa Buthelezi as she introduces her projects Emgonqweni.
Me. And before I get into the meat of it all, I do want to acknowledge and thank the work that CAP are doing for the field of photography in general, and more specifically, what this work means for Durban, what this kind of engaged and sustained knowledge making with images, what it contributes to Durban. Durban being a place that is often neglected and is kind of off the main centers of power. So I just want to just give my gratitude and words of encouragement for all that they do for the city. Ngaphela amandla. The intention for this session is to kind of continue a conversation that I think Mandisa and I have been engaged with on and off at different moments, at different levels of intensity, I think. And in 2020, I put together an essay that was reflecting on Mandisa's work. And through that process, I really got to understand more intimately the motivations behind her work and kind of what she looks for. And so there's a lot that I come with. And the idea was to allow some of those ideas to evolve, to return to some of them. And of course, first and foremost is to allow her to think out loud as well. And based on on the kind of what I think is a safe and secure friendship, is to also venture and veer into areas that are not as easy, and kind of the answers for which are not as clinical and as resolved. So yes, with that kind of out of the way, what I'd like to do, and I'm setting the scene here a bit. I will read a kind of a paragraph, which was a conclusion of this essay, and I'll then kind of speak to when I encountered Mandisa as a person, and that would naturally kind of lead her to pick up from that point and talk about this pivotal moment in her life, where kind of photography started to play and feature in her life in a very strong and particular way, and kind of how that moment has led to other moments which have led to this moment. Yeah, so she's going to do this through an exploration or a sharing of three bodies of work, if I'm not mistaken. After which I will come in with a set of questions. And Neve, I'm going to ask you to perhaps pull questions from the audience whilst all of this happens, and if you can channel those through to me in some way, either through the WhatsApp or through a direct message here, and I'll kind of filter those. I think it's important to have as many questions as possible. So even if it means that after you're sharing, Mandisa, I do like two questions from the list we've been talking about, and then allow the rest perhaps to come from the guests. I think it would be really useful. I think it'll be nice to get to hear what people are thinking with you and about your images. So with that, let me just read this kind of this conclusion of the essay. So it goes. The recurring figures in her images are cattle stock, almost exclusively cows, men, women, and at times young people of the countryside. Landscapes don't feature much. It could be said that she is interested in the lives lived as a means to access place. Her images present to us the quietude of the everyday and the business of social gatherings. This being important because she does not only, quote unquote, follow the spectacle of ceremonies, but she but she places the public moments alongside the quotidian, the everyday. This broad documentation of rural life is important because rural Zulu life is sometimes known through the narrow passages of celebrations that affirm the tropes, while the nuanced everyday meanders are overlooked. She therefore straightens the skewed view by adding a critical balance that frames a more wholesome account of a people and a place. Her ability to work between the two is commendable. For someone who is interested in the wholesome picture of a people, one is left wanting for a different perspective of the same people. For example, how might these people operate in peri-urban and fully urban contexts? There is a danger in the naive Black photographer working with potent Black subject matter. And I think at the surface, Mandisa knows how to treat this, but it might seem that she's still working through it internally as someone engaged in a self-reflective praxis. Buthelezi also escapes another trap of young urban Black artists exoticizing their own cultures as if they're outside it. Her familiarity to the culture and its traditions are evident in her outputs. In closing, given the public perception of Zulu people and the complexities of the Zulu identity, it's been difficult to detect the tensions of the tradition as it transitions into contemporary culture. On this point, one wonders whether the work pushes for a recalibration of how we perceive this culture. Should we expect this photographer to some of its rigid hierarchies that have emerged from mistranslations over centuries or decades? Question mark. Should we be content with images that quote unquote portray the culture, or should we invite a stronger dose of cultural critique? What is important for the culture at this point, its portrayal or questioning? And that is a question mark. And perhaps both. And can a photographer in search of her own questions be expected to take these questions in her stride? So these are my reflections of Mandisa's practice. And so this is kind of a moment to unpack some of these things and talk more broadly. I first met Mandisa around 2014. And during this time, we had kind of all converged. There was this hive of young people that were collecting around the KZNSA gallery. And this is when I first encountered her through a kind of photography collective called DCP, and she'll speak more to her time at DCP. But there was something that kind of stood out, Gumandisa. Partly it was just kind of the way that she carried herself and how that carriage of oneself was evident in the photographs that she had produced. And over time, of course, there's been this massive attention that has been drawn to Mandisa's work. And I've obviously followed her work over time. I think we've been in conversation. She had kind of produced a series of images that I'd asked her to kind of produce, some of which feature here. And then I wrote this essay. So, there's been a friendship that is kind of morphed into professional settings and otherwise. And so maybe this placed me like, the prime candidate to talk to Mandisa. But yeah, it feels like I'm kind of speaking to the void now. So Mandisa, can I maybe draw you closer and then maybe ask to start with some introductions, perhaps, your background, and then picking up from this point of DCP, and then kind of venture forward into these 3 or 4 bodies that you want us to follow your life through.
Thanks, Russell. Yeah, thanks for the reflection. Thank you for actually spending time with the work that I've been doing over the last 10 years. I think it's been 10 years of being in the photography space. So it's always lovely to see someone look at your work and look at it with a critical eye and of course have the honor of having them write about the work. I think it gives new dimensions and new layers to the work. Thank you to CAP for inviting me, and thank you for the wonderful and very important work that CAP is doing in Durban and KZN in the photography landscape. So I'll just go into it, really. I think Russell is the one who suggested that I start with a bit of background because it lays a strong foundation for context. It lays a strong foundation for my position as a photographer and my interests that I have. I guess also, yeah, the viewpoints I decide to stand on, or yeah, how I choose to kind of view photography as a practice and as a tool for self-expression. So I grew up Umlazi. I was born in Empangeni. My father's from Empangeni or Esikhaweni. My mother's from Engqutu, originally from Engqutu. They then moved to Impume, which is a mission just south of Durban. And then from there, Umlazi. So I grew up in Umlazi and a very, strong family unit. There was a lot of us, but I think Ugogo was a very integral part of the family. She kind of was the glue that kept everyone together. So there were cousins, aunts, uncles, very big household. But I'd say Gogo is the one who really played a significant role in making sure that everyone felt at home. So the experience that I have is strongly rooted in the township kind of surrounding, my growing up experience. I went to school. I studied at DUT. Started construction management and quantity surveying. I ended up, you'll see the photo there, working in the industry for about 3 years. And then, of course, in the construction industry and how it's designed, we all know that the workforce from the construction industry mostly, well, at least 10 years ago when I was still in the industry, and I'm sure it still looks like that now, the workforce is not from the city. The work is in the city, but they are not from the city. They're from rural areas or peri-urban areas around South Africa. But of course, I mean, you spend a lot of time on site, you spend a lot of time, it's quite rigorous work, and you form friendships, you form relationships with people, you form bonds, to a point where people speak about family, they speak about home, what they left behind at home, umhlaba, family, cattle, livestock, home. So I became very intrigued by this whole notion of home, because for me, the experience that I had a very strong, like I say, township. And unfortunately, we didn't go to Emakai. We didn't go to my mother's side of the family. We didn't go to Newcastle, which is my father's side of the family, from a Makaya point of view. It was always Umlazi. So there was a pull this thing had on me. I became very interested about impilo, or life outside of the city or township kind of surrounding. So I bought a camera and recreationally started taking images or making images. And after that, I got close to one of the gentlemen called Gumede. And here's Gumede here. I've decided to start my work or the presentation itself with Gumede's image, because I think he represents a very integral part of the shift that happened from an industry point of view, from the engineering industry to the culture and creative industry, but also from an identity point of view, where I started to question a lot of things about myself, about my family structure, about my identity, and how my surrounding and my background has informed my perspective. So I was now starting to look at the other side. What is the other side of culture that I have not been exposed to? This idea of home, this idea of rural/cultural life, or cultural life that is still very evident and strong in rural settings, made me want to go back into the rural community and photograph and understand this life that everyone seems to be talking about on sites. It was a common theme. Everyone speaks about home with such pride. but understand it from my personal perspective. What is it that I am, what is the other? What is it that I am missing out on, or what is it that is not part of my upbringing? Could I learn about myself? What can I learn about myself outside of this current setting that I know? So I think Ugumede, like I say, plays a very strong, he's still very much in contact. He's based in Mthunzini. But I think he represents a start of a new kind of thinking about photography, about myself, about space, about upbringing. And I guess the shift happened when I started to interrogate or go to rural communities with a camera in hand. It changes the dynamics, because what photography does, or what it did to me, is that it made me look at everything with a very critical eye. All of a sudden, your surrounding, when when you encounter the camera, all of a sudden your surrounding, you're confronted in a different way. It's not as noisy as when you are not holding a camera. All of a sudden, you're able to kind of focalize your thinking and your energy into an image or the process of photography, and you're able to interrogate the surrounding with a much more critical view. So it was interesting for me to go to Mthunzini to photograph Gumede in his natural setting, in his home setting, in his comfortable setting, because the work dynamic requires him to be in a particular way. But to see him in his natural setting, to see him where he's king, where he's comfortable to be who he is, and to be who he is, and to explore who he is and how he feels he can do it, for me was pivotal. And so I like the idea of going to emakhaya and photographing, going to emakhaya and spending time with people and understanding their family dynamics, their ancestral dynamics sometimes, their architectural dynamics, the role of Isbaya, the role of Indlu kaGogo, the role of all these things that I had no clue existed, because, in my upbringing, none of that, I knew about it to some degree, but I'd never experienced it for myself. So to see it through the lens of people that I'd been close to was really interesting for me. So 2014 is really when I started, like Russell said, 2014 is when I think I started to consider myself a photographer. Although, I still struggle to call myself a photographer sometimes, because I really think I'm more interested in culture, and then the camera is really just a tool for me. But this image, or these two images, really were from Emahlabathini, Ulundi Olumahlekile. And I think from here, this was actually for a wedding. But I started to also make images of things that are happening around in the community. And, the shift from the one environment to the other, shift from the engineering sector to the cultural sector, has been it's been difficult in a lot of ways, but I think the work is a lot more rewarding. I think the work has a lot more depth. The work in the culture and creative sector, that is, it has a lot more depth and brings a lot more purpose in ways that fulfill me greater than I think work in the engineering sector would have fulfilled me. So I think walking into spaces and really having the camera in hand and experiencing or exploring how people live, how people navigate spaces, how people own spaces is really, it took me, it made me one, understand the greater cultural context, but also ask myself, where do I position myself in this greater context? And I think the camera then started being the tool that kind of facilitated this conversation. But in the initial stages, I must be quite honest that it was literally me waking up in the morning and having my camera and going to photograph whatever I saw. it was almost like a toddler. You know, when a toddler starts walking and they all of a sudden the world opens up and they start opening things and jumping on things. And it was a similar scenario where it was everything was exciting, everything was interesting visually, everything was taste to the eyes. And I wanted to explore all of that. But what really changed my thinking and what really made me appreciate photography a bit more was through joining DCP. Now, Russel has spoken very briefly about DCP, but I think DCP played such an important role in providing a framework that I think one could work in when trying to understand or trying to talk about something using the camera. So DCP, through Peter McKenzie and everyone else who was involved at the time, presented a way in which you could communicate using your camera. So it wasn't just about making random images. That's not the point of photography, or that's the principle that kind of carried DCP, that yes, you can have a technically sound image in every single way, but the biggest thing is how do you communicate a particular message using the camera as a tool. So DCP, I think, did very well in facilitating that kind of thoughts in me and kind of bringing structure to the practice of photography. Because prior to that, I was just making images. I was walking around making images. There was an interest in culture. There was an interest in things that are happening in my environment, but I didn't know what is the point of this all. But I think DCP did very well in kind of bringing structure and bringing meaning to the work that I was doing. And of course, it also facilitated and presented the various ways and approaches one can take when trying to, talk about or deliver your message via the camera. But I think the biggest thing or the biggest shift that happened in my career was through Izithunzi Zami, which is a body of work I created in 2016 during a residency in Marseille. And Izithunzi Zami is run by photographer Antoine Diagata, who's a magnum photographer. And I don't know if Paulo and Shireen are here. They also went through the same residency, and they can tell you how intense the whole experience was. Izithunzi Zami was such a pivotal body of work in my life because it really spoke to what do I want to do with the camera. So at DCP, I think kind of set the foundation and did the facilitated the teaching and the framework in which one can work in and the various ways in which one can communicate. But I think what Izithunzi Zami and the residency did was make me understand, what do I want to say? What do I want to communicate? What are the themes that exist within Mandisa that I'm trying to communicate using the camera? So Izithunzi Zami was done over a period of, I think it was a week and a half that I spent in France, which was also quite challenging because a lot of the work that I'd done prior to that was only in KZN. In fact, a lot of the work I do and I still do right now is only in KZN. So it was very challenging to be kind of plucked out of your natural and comfortable environment and put in a very different setting in every single way, linguistically, environmentally, in various ways, and now be expected to create a body of work. And Antoine has a very interesting way of working. He will get to the core of who you are. He will make you work for your image. But the biggest thing he looks for in images is honesty. It's getting into the depths of who you are and what is it are you trying to say with your camera. And he will always say that the camera doesn't lie. If you're honest in your work, it'll show. People will feel it when they watch the image or when they look at the images. You will know it when you make the images. So Izithunzi Zami required me to really get into the depths of what I am trying to say. What am I trying to explore? It's called Izithunzi Zami because although the environment was very foreign, it was almost like there was a spirit or a shade that was following me. It almost felt like there were I had my whole lineage follow me. In fact, my grandmother had just passed away the year before in 2015. And so her spirit felt very much alive during that process of creating these images. And I don't know if it's because it was a different environment where I kind of had to be alone from the norm, and get into myself, or if it was the fact that maybe from a cultural and a language point of view, it was a very foreign thing to me. So I held back. Instead of submerging myself into the space, I kind of held back because I was in state of mourning, really. So I took the opportunity to this opportunity of solitude and this opportunity to be within self in a different environment where no one knows me, where no one knows my context. I took that opportunity and kind of just ran with it. I don't know, but it felt like there were shades following me, and it felt like it was a renewal of self. It felt like I was understanding new layers of who Mandisa was, but understanding them through the lens of who I come from, where I come from, particularly who I come from because of my grandmother. I think I just felt like her spirit was very much there. And so the work plays a lot with shades, it plays a lot with light. But really, this work cemented my voice and what I was trying to do with my camera. I was really trying to explore identity. I'm really trying to explore who Mandisa is as a person and who Mandisa is in the greater scheme of things. I won't speak to individual images. I'll just go through the bodies of work as and how they unfold or as how they're presented on the screen. But I think it's important that I understand, I break down the context that the work exists in, and that what is it that I was trying to do with the camera at that particular time. So this work really opened up the themes that I wanted to talk about. The themes of spirituality, themes of culture, the themes of identity. And I think when I came back after the residency, I then went to Market Photo Workshop for an incubator program. I think it was a year-long incubator program. And in that program, you're required to do a body of work. And I then created a body of work that still explored the idea of identity. I struggled a lot with this work. I struggled a lot with this work. I think I remember Michelle from Market Photo Workshop, one of the crit sessions was so bad, I actually cried. It was so bad. And I knew what I wanted to say. I kind of knew how I wanted to say it, but I just felt like it was not true. Somehow I was just grappling with this idea of how do I say what I want to say? How do I say it in an honest way? But somehow the work just didn't feel true. And I don't know if it was because it was Johannesburg, which again is a foreign setting. But also, I mean, if you juxtapose it to Marseille, it should feel more familiar. It should be more familiar because it was in South Africa. But this body of work I struggled greatly with. Although I understand that it served the purpose in that it really kind of also cemented this idea of I want to explore culture, I want to explore identity, I want to explore how I interact with my environment and in relation to bringing in my upbringing, bringing in what has informed my thinking, bringing in all the knowledge that I had known and kind of and gotten over the years at DCP and the Market Photo Workshop. So this work here, I still haven't picked it up. I don't think I'll revisit it maybe some other time, but I really struggled with this particular body of work. But what the work did, and I think that year of 2016, 2017, those 2 years were very fundamental in making me understand that as much as I can turn the camera to myself as much as I can document myself, I still exist within a greater kind of cultural context. And so I started to take the camera now and look at my environment again, now with a refreshed lens, in that I had interrogated in a lot of ways who I was and understood where my shortfalls were, from a technical point of view, but also from a conceptual point of view. But I was like, okay, how about now I stand back and kind of try to understand who Mandisa is within this bigger cultural or societal context. And that is where Amanazareta, works such as Amanazareta, works such as, I'll get into other work, but Amanazareta specifically, it drew me, as a photographer, I was drawn to the Nazareth Baptist Church. And I know there's a lot of controversy around, the formulation as well as what it represents, and some people saying it doesn't represent Zulu culture. But we also need to look at the aspects and how Amanazareta have become, in a lot of ways, archivists of certain elements that represent Zulu culture, whether through instruments, whether through markers, in whatever case. I was interested in how, in a lot of ways, Prophet Isaiah Shembe has championed this idea of documenting who we are as Zulu culture. And I know, Russel, this idea of Zuluness, or this, Zulu identity, is one that there's a lot of connotations to it, very complex connotations to it. But I personally feel that Prophet Isaiah Shembe has, through documenting, although it goes with it's very geared towards a spiritual lens, but there are so many facets of who we are as Zulu nation that I think he has managed to sustain through writing, through singing, through regalia. We cannot deny that. That it represents some facet of who we are as a people. So I started to want to understand this environment of Zuluness, ubanzi, the breadth of who we are, the depth of who we are as a people. So realizing that I don't operate in isolation, and I juxtapositioning my personal introspection in relation to this surrounding that I find myself in. So Amanazareta, this was during Umkhosi Welembe, 2018, if I'm not mistaken. I was just, drawn to it. I'd photographed Amanazareta as part of work that we had done with the DCP in 2016, but I felt that this work kind of spoke more to me. And I think it also looks at how, if you look at the images, you'll see that most of them are very much wide. They're very open. You can feel that I'm at a distance, and that's very intentional. Because I'm not part of the Nazareth Baptist Church, but I really wanted to go in and understand and see the different facets of how they've represented the culture and how they represented spirituality in this context. But it's important, I think, as a photographer, to really be intentional about how you position yourself. Are you going in there? Are you really going in there? Are you demanding people to gaze into the lens? Or are you, because that speaks a lot to what your relationship is with the people. It speaks a lot to what your relationship is with the concept or that you are exploring itself. So Amanazareta, I'm hoping to pick this work up in a much more intimate way, because I think over the years I've read more about Amanazareta as opposed to photographing Amanazareta. Then moving towards, again, this bigger cultural context, Ekhaya then is a body of work that kind of looks at the various cultural characteristics or markers that I think are familiar to a lot of us, and significant in some ways, and maybe if there's certain images that would require you to really spend some time and meditate on and kind of understand how they fit into the grander cultural context. If you look at, for instance, this image speaks a lot about some of the themes that I explore in the work. These images speak to the themes, or the main themes that I explore in the work, the themes of ikaya, home, this theme of belonging, this theme of identity. What do you identify as, or who do you identify to? All these concepts surrounding ikaya, concepts surrounding, to a large degree, women. I mean, these are children, but these are themes that I aim to explore in the work that I do. And I think ikaya looks at all these different facets of a culture. So when I look at ikaya, I think about meaning, I think about context. The images may move you a particular way, and you should ask yourself, why is this image moving me a particular way? Why is it swaying me in a particular direction? Why is this making me uncomfortable? So the work of ikaya really aims to delve into those cultural nuances that we see, and maybe not spend time meditating on, but I think it's important that we understand these nuances, because they speak to how we navigate space. They speak to how we shift and move when we move from one area to another. So ikaya, it becomes a significant body of work in that way, in relation to my photography, and that it just makes me understand how culture shifts and people shift as they move and navigate different spaces, and in various ways. I'll just run through the images. Yeah, so I think it's important to say that I generally don't caption my images, and that's just the choice I make, because I love the image to kind of spark something in you, and people respond to it very differently. People read it very differently, and I think I open that conversation up to the audience to kind of look into the image and see what it means to them. But still going into this context of understanding who I am within a bigger scheme, uBhuku lukaMenzi then becomes a body of work that I created around the year 2020, 2019, 2018, 2019, around about those years. And the aim really was to look at impilo, or Princess Mkabayi Kajama's life. But really, if you look at the images again, Princess Mkabayi Kajama's life is just an entry point. When you start looking at the actual images and honing into each image, there's symbolism, there's markers, there's instruments that I use to speak about culture and to open up different conversations in relation to history, and facilitating this conversation between history and heritage and contemporary times. What do we still see that was there then? What is still significant? What is still relevant? What is, so it looked at uBhuku lukaMenzi, which is Mkabayi Kajama, but really it looks at culture and tries to fiddle with this interplay between the old and the new, the little things that we still practice. For instance, indlu kagogo is something that we know which is of cultural relevance, and it was there back then. How much of that do we still see today? How important is it still today? How significant is it still in today's context? Isibaya and cattle. When you speak of Isibaya and expanding its meaning and understanding that it's not just housing cattle, but thinking about umsamo linkages to that, and how that in the family unit, how important that is to have that within Icege or within the household, so that you have these strong linkages between the then and the now, the old and the new. So these little facets that you see within the images that kind of connect the old, the new, and not just in a bigger cultural context, but honing into your own personal life and finding little.
Sorry, Mandisa.
Yes, yes, Russ.
I thought it might be useful just to locate Umkabayi in the lineage of the royal family. And so Umkabayi is kind of the matriarch who was sister to Usenza Ngakhona. And was kind of responsible for holding together the Zulu Empire at a very critical point. And it's kind of someone who is said to have almost kind of broke it and facilitated a transition of power between a number of men that was kind of around. And there's a kind of, given the importance of the work that she had contributed in holding this critical moments of Zulu history, there has not been as much writing and kind of reverence for the work that she did. And so I just thought it would be useful for those who are not familiar with Umkabayi just to locate her and her role in kind of the royal lineage, and perhaps it kind of gives something to the images that you're showing as well. I'll step down and hand the mic back to you.
Thanks, Russ. Yeah, no, it's and that was actually one of the main reasons why I did this work particularly. And even though it's not a deliberate representation of what I think her life would have been, I think just to have her name housed and anchored, or reinforced through photography is I guess a responsibility that I have as a photographer. Is how do I make sure that some facets of who we are I documented, and where there's a shortfall, we kind of prop that up in whatever language or tool you choose to use. So yeah, Umkabayi is ubhuku lukaMenzi. The work speaks about Umkabayi, but it has grander meaning in the sense that I wanted to connect the old and the new. Hence my decision to go the black and white route. And if you look at the images quite closely, you may not be able to see it on the screen, but there's a very strong graininess about the image. That was quite intentional as well, making sure, or not making sure, but just trying to fiddle with this idea of, is this an old image? Was it made? When was this image made? Really, I want to toy with this idea of time, toy with this idea of which period was this created. So just trying to connect the old and the new, trying to connect the elements that may have existed back then with what we still see in contemporary culture now. Yeah, so still exploring themes of ikaya, exploring themes of livestock, or exploring themes of women, actually.
Segela Kwaratu, yeah?
Is it? Sure. My goodness, okay. I think then, Russell, just with regards to the work, I think I've shared an overview of the work. Maybe we can go into questions. We can go into questions. But for me, I think Ukari May Williams speaks very densely about this idea of you can't change a society until you change yourself. You have to change the self first. And I think I may not be able to change society with my images. That's really not the aim. But in exploring self, I think it's important to explore the society, or to explore the greater cultural context that I exist in. And I think the photography has also introduced a phenomenal opportunity for who has the camera in hand. It's important who has the camera in hand, because they kind of control representation. They control the narrative. So it's important as a Black person to own the camera in the retelling of our culture, of who we are, and how we are represented in here or in globally. So I really aim with my work to kind of capsulate everything that we are in some way, whether it's positive or negative, but I really aim to kind of give an honest and an ethical way or representation of who we are. We know, especially when it comes to the cultural context, we know how representation has been kind of skewed based on power imbalances in the past. But I think having a camera as a young person makes me realize the responsibility I have in one, documenting things and how they are. Because, in doing that, we just ensure that there are no, we ensure that we represent ethically, we represent things for what they really are instead of having a particular agenda or connotation to it. I think, we can head into questions, Russ, just to save time.
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to highlight this one point in two of the works you shared, which is Izithunzi's Army, where the images you made in France and the images you made in Johannesburg. And it's the only two bodies where you feature as both photographer and subject. And I thought that was quite telling. And in those two bodies, the one feels much more honest, to kind of go back to the point you made about Antoine, that the camera doesn't lie. The first series, the Izithunzi's Army, the one you made in France, they really feel like there was something really kind of spiritual, like the images are very light, whereas the other, like they they feel a bit callous, are kind of unresolved, uncertain, and unsure. And you've pointed to why that is the case. I just thought that was a very interesting thing. And then as one transitions into the work you've done of Amanazareta, there's a very sharp and pointed maturity that those images exude. I remember looking at those images and thinking, okay, this we're engaging with like a whole other level of Mandisa here. And then kind of from there on, that maturity has evolved. But what the question I'd maybe would like to start with, and I'm wondering, Mandisa, how, because the work is so kind of because through the work you're trying to interrogate notions of yourself in relation to society at large, how do you enter into a body of work? Like what is the starting point? Do you set up a particular scheme of what you're looking? Is there a kind of methodology that you adopt and kind of just follow through? And then I think Uminentle had asked in the questions, so one second, let me just get this question. He asks, do you name the series or the body of work before or after shooting? So if you can maybe just answer both of those questions in one link, good.
I generally, I think maybe it's important to also mention that I don't photograph all the time. In fact, it's been a while since I photographed. And I think that speaks to the process, I guess, because I do work when the work calls me. I do work when it's required. It pulls me. The work pulls me. I don't photograph for the sake of photographing. So the process is very slow. Process of photography, photography as a practice in my life is a very slow process. It depends. The type of work depends on, or how I approach the work depends on the type of work. So for instance, with Umlazi, there's a lot of historical knowledge there that I kind of needed to understand before I entered the work. So there's a lot of reading that happens or that happened during the process of creating Umlazi. So when you then have the camera in hand, you come with you're informed in a lot of ways, especially because you are representing someone else's life. I think there has to be a lot more delicacy in how you approach the camera in that way. But certain work like Izithunzi's Army, for instance, particularly the first one that I did during the residency, it was a different kind of approach. That required me to write a lot. I spent a lot of time writing and expressing and pouring and, really trying to understand what am I trying to say, how am I going to say it before I even approach the camera. So a lot of time was spent writing, a lot of time was spent thinking, a lot of time was spent meditating, a lot of time was spent just really getting to the core of what I'm trying to say and what I'm feeling, so that when I approach the camera, I approach it with honesty and truth. And I guess that's why, Russell, you're saying that the work feels much more honest. And then, there's certain work such as Amanazareta, where it's in a setting, it's in a public setting, and it's more observational. So it's coming into the space, absorbing the space, understanding the dynamics in the space, and then deciding on your positionality. This is what I'm trying to say, and therefore I'm going to stand here and I'm going to photograph like this, and this is what I'm going to photograph. So it really depends on the type of work and the body, and the series that I'm photographing. The approach changes based on that. And I generally name the title, the bodies of work before I start, because I think it kind of, I struggle to work when things are all over the place. I'm a person of, I have a high regard for structure, so it helps to kind of channel my thinking. Otherwise, I become too all over the place. So I name the work before, and then if it evolves, if it shifts in between the process, then that's that. But I think in terms of framing my thinking and how I approach the work, it helps to kind of have a name before.
Got you. Usiviwe Jali, ubuza ukuthi, is there a significance between the images in stock, black and white, compared to the full color images, or is it purely a stylistic choice? And the other question is from Umtogo Mazibugo, who asks, what interests you so much about Amanazaret? Over to you.
Okay, let's start with the first question, black and white and color. Again, it's really about the purpose of the work, and what I'm hoping to achieve with the work. Like I say, with Umlazi, it was very deliberate. The black and white images were very deliberate because I was toying with this idea of time and time periods, and trying to link the various time periods. And I think black and whites, initially, in fact, before I go into color, initially a lot of the work I did was in black and whites. I think you'll see that with the first images I shared. Again, I think it helped channel my view. I don't know, but I feel like black and white images kind of, they gather me. I all over the place. I don't know if it's I don't know if it's color or what, but initially when I started photography, I just felt like, I can view the images with in a much more crystal way if it's in black and white. But different bodies of work move you in a particular way, and you feel like you want to document in a particular way, or approach the editing process in a particular way. But with Bugula specifically, it was a very deliberate choice based on the fact that we are doing these linkages. So I guess it's aesthetics, but highly driven by the messaging, highly driven by the objective of the actual work, and what the work hopes to achieve, and what it hopes to spark when you look at the images. And then the second question, Russell, just remind me, sorry.
Sure. I'll get to it right now. It's what interested you, Umanazaret?
Hey, Amanazareta. I guess it's a personal spiritual journey. Sometimes you are drawn to certain things and you don't understand why, but some time later you begin to understand why. It begins to make sense. I guess with Amanazareta, it was the same thing. I was just drawn to how, again, I say how I felt like it was a way, how the religion is structured, or how how everything is structured for me in a zota, in a Nhlonipho, and it for me acts as a part of preservation, a way of holding some of the things that we have lost. But it's almost packaged in a very respectable and structured way. And I think that drew me to Amanazareta, but there's other spiritual reasons that I now understand somewhat 6-7 years later after photographing the body of work. I think, yeah, I think I just resonate with it in a lot of ways, both from a role as a person who I think is a photographer in a lot of ways who preserves through imagery, but also in ways that I think are much more spiritual and connecting to various dimensions.
Oh. So there's a question from Karabelo Dimeki. It reads, you seem to negotiate a relationship with each environment you are in. And I think this beautifully shows through how each project in its own distinct environment has its own kind of beingness. So I want to ask, in each different environment you are in, how does the camera adapt and respond? And how does this process feel like?
Hey, yeah, young Julie Zamanje. It's a wonderful question. I think one of the biggest things I'm very grateful for is being a part of DCP, because it really gave me the training I required to understand how you approach a space, especially when you have a camera in place or camera in hand. As a human, I guess I'm very sensitive, so I think my approach is always with sensitivity. It's always with some delicacy. It's understanding that with the camera in hand, I have the power of representing whatever space or whomever is part of this image. So I always approach with delicacy. Sometimes it's a very uncomfortable space to be in, especially when you are documenting a space that you don't have much control over. But I think it's important to recognize that, I think one of the other things that we are taught quite densely at DCP is that it's not subjects. You're not dealing with subjects. You're dealing with people. You're dealing with humans. So walking into a space and recognizing that you are dealing with humans and people, I think it channels your approach. It channels how you carry yourself, how you carry the camera, and how you carry people's narratives. So you carry it with delicacy and some sort of responsibility. So the different environments require obviously different kind of approaches. I mean, with Ubugulamenzi, a lot of it was staged. So I can exude my dominance much more there. Versus, for instance, I'm a Nazareta, where I understand, first of all, I'm not in Nazareta. Secondly, it was a public space. So, and you're dealing with people. So it's important that, you understand the kind of space that you're in and how much control you have in terms of how you impose yourself within and how you take over a space. Russell, can you remind me of the second part of the question? Sorry.
The second part was, okay, I have to read it. How does the camera adapt and respond, and how does it feel like? How does the process feel like?
I guess it's back to that. Camera is a tool. You have control over a camera. What's important is that you, who informs the camera, has a very a very fixed positionality and standpoint, and you understand what you are trying to do and how you do it. Obviously, you want to do it as ethically as possible, but camera is there to facilitate this conversation you're really having with the environment. Camera responds to how you respond to the environment. Like I say, if the work is honest, then that becomes an honest process. If the work is uncomfortable, again, that becomes an uncomfortable process. And the camera is just there as the middle between you and whatever's happening in your surroundings. So I think, camera is just, it's in between you and what's happening on the other side of the lens.
Sure. Hey, Mandisa, I mean, I found it, so maybe just to go back to this point about the use, about color and black and white. The two bodies of work that are in color are again the bodies that you had made, one in France and the other in Johannesburg, both of which feature you. And after that, I've never seen any images that you've made in color. So I also think there's something going on there. Maybe I'm reading too much into the situation, but that was fascinating to make that connection. And I've got more questions, but before I do, I just want to mention to everyone that we intend to be done at 10 minutes past 7. So you can either stick around, or if you have to rush, you may bow out. Mandisa, I found this work to be particularly interesting because, if I'm not mistaken, it's the only work that is staged that has been made public in kind of your later projects, and because it's staged, I think there was a lot that one could read about. Perhaps for me, it became really clear that your objective is about representing. It's about presenting reality as it is. And for example, the image to the right, for example, with kind of the woman who's sat on the floor, and the male who kind of stands above that. I think that's one image that's never left my mind in your work, because I was kind of trying to think about, like, what were you going through in kind of staging, in setting the scene, yeah, and how much of this, like, how you were thinking about, say, the dynamics that are at play here, not only at the level of gender, but also at, it's kind of where it's placed, what objects you feature in here, and what else did you remove? Only because I think you, as you said, you have quite a bit of no, I don't know if power is the term, but there's a level of interference that you can perform here, that I think you have chosen not to take, right? And then I was like, okay, Umandisa is really interested about presenting things as they are in this case. Is this an accurate reading, or am I misreading something here?
No, it's an interesting question. And a lot of people actually are intrigued by this image. And I guess, again, it speaks to a lot of dynamics, gender dynamics, and the roles, and power dynamics, even within gender context. But I guess the topic here, gender, and the topic of roles comes with a lot of complexities.
Sure.
It comes with a lot of sometimes problematics, but I think with this image, for me, and this is how I interpret it. We spoke densely with Leaf about it in one of the sessions that we had earlier this year.
Say again, sorry, can you repeat that?
I was saying that we spoke, Unif and I spoke about this image quite densely for the very same reasons, in what it represents and what it's trying to say. But for me, it was, I've got an entirely different interpretation in how I read this kind of setting or setup. I think it's important to acknowledge Uti, as a people, we believe Uti, the woman, is more grounded from a spiritual point of view. In fact, this is, I don't know if it's a biased view because I'm a woman myself, but I really think Uti, women are the backbone of every society. And so it requires some sort of grounding. And this image speaks to that in a very literal kind of way. But it's a requirement. As a woman, I don't know if it's something we're born with, or I don't know what it is, but for me, it speaks to the grounding, it speaks to the closeness to the ground, it speaks to her touching the soil, it speaks to the soil, it speaks to the land, it speaks to the ancestors that are within the soil. So she being at the bottom is really not her being at the bottom. She is seated. It's not really saying that she's below or beneath, from a societal point of view, from a gender point of view. But for me, it means that she has to be the closest to the ground. She has to be the one that's really rooted in order for this man to be able to stand up, and obviously with Iskumba at the back there, be able to house all of this, which speaks back to a homestead. So I think people have different interpretations, different meanings, but for me, it's really important to understand the role in the spiritual sense and in the being in tune sense, like being, in being able to connect in a much more crystal way.
Uyibeke kahle, and I think these points of clarity I think are important because each one brings their own intelligence and therefore their own interpretation into this, right? And sometimes we start to embellish onto things that had a very kind of like the photographer had a completely different, or the artist had a completely different take and kind of trying to portray something else. And so the fact that you are kind of reading and trying to project something completely different, I think is important to highlight as well, because it also helps us kind of pull back and think about the multiple interpretations of a single image. You know, it can be read in many other ways. So I'm really, really thankful that you've clarified there. So I've got a question from Onomalungelo Gambu. Utiena, it sounds like your creative process is emotional or spiritual. How do you remove yourself from the environment once a body of work is done? We have 6 minutes, so so I'm able to wrap up in good time. Should I read the question again?
You read it again?
Yeah. It sounds like your creative process is emotional or spiritual. How do you remove yourself from the environment once a body of work is done?
So just to get clarity, remove myself once the work is done, when I'm done photographing, or how do I kind of isolate myself during the creation of the body of work? So I'm just trying to get clarity.
It's once the body of work is done. So how do you facilitate, because of this kind of spiritual direction, how do you meditate out of a body of work once it's been produced?
Interestingly, there's work that I think I still need to complete. A lot of the work that I've done is not complete. And perhaps it's not meditating out of a body of work, but it's allowing the work to move me to a different body of work. So it's really facilitating that movement between different bodies of work, as opposed to leaving this work and moving to the next. It's recognizing that it's all it knits together. It's almost one massive body of work that has sub-themes, or that is categories, or however you want to cluster them. But I think, I don't move out of it. I don't pluck myself out of it completely. I kind of allow it to shift me whatever direction it shifts me to. And I think it's a thread of many bodies of work.
No, thank you for that. We've got just under 2 minutes remaining. And with that, Mandisa, I would like to thank you, and I'm really grateful that we were able to have this kind of genuine conversations. And I want to assure you that the troubling of culture is not one of kind of being disruptive, but it's also ensuring that we are troubling those things that need to be troubled, as a way of calibrating this thing that has kind of brought us to where we are today. I think someone said, if a culture that cannot self-reflect is in trouble, or something like this. And I also want to acknowledge that the history is messy, and so is culture and tradition, etc., etc. All these things are clunky, and they're very difficult to kind of speak about them in neat and clean terms. So I want to encourage you to kind of keep doing what you're doing. It's clear that umsebenzi wakho resonates widely and deeply. And so please keep doing what you do. For me, it would be really interesting to see what this stuff looks like when you are ugogo, and kind of reflect over like 40 years or 50 years of producing, and kind of, what that allows us to read about a tradition and a heritage. Just Neve has asked me to reiterate that at CAP, They don't take images, they make images. So I want to acknowledge that. And she says that she's noting all the questions that have been sent and those that we have not responded to here. She will ask Mandisa to kind of write back to, and maybe I'm now adding my own parts, and maybe it's something that she puts on Instagram, on the CAP profile or something. I'm not sure how this would be communicated back to the public. I want to thank all of you who've stuck around for an hour and 10 minutes. And in closing, these moments of photographers or artists who are able to take us through their thought process is so important and so needed, simply because in the world of social media, where people kind of access images across space and time, there's a bunch of misreadings that are possible, and maybe sometimes they are productive and sometimes not very much. But I think through what we've seen and heard over the past hour, we get to see the photographer or the artist speaking for themselves about the work, and it's not only writers and critics that are kind of privileged with that voice and that opportunity. And I think it's really, really important, the fact that the photographer's voice is important, as our voice is also important, because you made the stuff for us, right? And so to kind of, for those two opinions to encounter and meet somewhere is a really, really important platform and a time for us to meditate in and over. And with that, Neve, I'm going to hand over back to you.